Hey guys, welcome to the summit discussing social action for climate change. We're here discussing SDG number 9 today, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And we're super grateful to have Paul with us from Farm Urban, who is basically the future of urban farming. And honestly, I don't know much about it. So I would love for you to tell us the story of how this came to be.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Cameron. Yeah. So thanks for the intro. So yeah, my name is Paul Myers, and I'm one of the co-founders and the managing director of Farm Urban, based up in Liverpool. And I probably want to spend about half an hour, 45 minutes, just really sharing with you our journey. Tell you a little bit about what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. And then really get into some of the obstacles that we've faced, some of the challenges we've overcome, and some of the things we've learned along the way. So hopefully for those of you that don't know much about urban farming or vertical farming, you'll learn some things here. Okay, so essentially we're all about trying to find ways of growing food that are future-proof. So ways that of producing food that's good for people and good for the planet. And within the company, there's three main areas that we focus on. We focus heavily on research. You know, it's a really new field. So lots of R&D. We have a big focus on education because we believe it's really important that people understand why we need to start thinking about producing food differently, and then finally growing. So the company was founded, as I said, by myself. So my background's in something called molecular epigenetics, which is this idea that your health and well-being is influenced by your environment, and that happens through your DNA and lots of molecular mechanisms and processes that happen in there. And then the other person behind Farm Urban is Jens. I always complain that he has a picture of a molecule representing himself, but he's insistent on that's how he wants to be represented. So his background's in computational biochemistry. So we're both science nerds. He spent a lot of time traveling around the world and seeing how resources were used in good ways and bad ways. And we kind of came together in about 2013, and we shared really a disillusionment with the slow pace and detachment of academia in our experience, the academia that we were in. And we'd both been on this journey discovering how, you know, humans feeding themselves is at the root of so many problems around the world. We had shared interest in permaculture and sustainable food practices. And we kind of got our heads together and thought, you know, there must be something we can do in this city to bring all this together. So if I just kind of really get into a little bit more detail on my own journey, you know, the angle I was coming at this from. So I think the first concept that really got me interested in science at all was this, you know, idea, theory of evolution. It seemed really relevant to me back when I was like 15, 16, and it was quite disruptive to my worldview at the time. So I decided that I was going to go and learn more about it. I wanted to go on and do a degree in human biology and really get to understand it. But as with most things, you know, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So I went on to do a PhD, as I just mentioned before. And, you know, this idea of kind of things improving over time, which is how I viewed it, really didn't seem to be holding true. So, you know, when I looked at the world around me, what I saw looked more like that, you know. And that's a bit of a flippant image. You know, you don't have to be overweight to be unhealthy, but you get the point. You know, something's gone wrong here. And I really wanted to understand, you know, what that was, what's gone wrong and why. So that's really the motivating cause that led me to, you know, into science, really trying to find some answers to these questions. So I'll just show you the next slide, which is a 4-year PhD summarized in about 30 seconds. So just the best bits. You have to pay attention to this one. So we've got good health down at the bottom here in blue, and bad health up at the top in orange. And I would say that in the Western world, we're stuck somewhere in the middle. So we're faced by these 5 major challenges: diabetes, lung disease, cancer, heart disease, and mental health conditions. And these all exist and are really prevalent, despite the fact that there's more drugs on the market than there's ever been. There's bigger and better hospitals being built all the time, better diagnostics, better biomedical research, and better drug discovery. Now, this really is essentially the top-down approach to healthcare. And it doesn't matter, we put money in and we get all these amazing innovations, but they're not really working as well as they should. We're still stuck somewhere in the middle. And what I really want to understand is, what's gone wrong here and why, and what's standing in our way. And what I discovered, and many, many researchers have discovered as well, is that that's actually our environment. So people are less active, the food quality is poor, we eat junk food, we drink, we're stressed, and we smoke. So these are kind of environmental risk factors, and it doesn't matter how much money you pump in at the top and how amazing those innovations are. When your environment looks more like that, we're never going to realize the full potential of those innovations. So I started to think a bit differently and decide, we need a bottom-up approach to healthcare, one in which people are less stressed, they eat better, they get outside more, they exercise more. And when your environment looks more like that, then they can really start to work together, the top-down and the bottom-up approach. And that's how I think you really start to realize the potential and improves the global health of the global population. So, that was a really interesting concept to me and a really interesting challenge. And I just kept coming back to this idea of the environment. What is our environment? What is it that makes up our environment? And the thing I kept coming back to was food. So, it's kind of obvious that the food you put into your body is going to have an impact on your own health and well-being. But what was less obvious to me at that time was the impact that us feeding ourselves has on the global environment, the planet. And I just want to share with you kind of some of the things that I learned over the years that just blew my mind and really kind of put us on this path of trying to find more sustainable ways to feed ourselves. So the first thing I started looking into was the meat industry. So, what's the true cost of the meat in that burger? What do we have to just destroy to get to it? So, first of all, we need somewhere to graze our cattle, and, fields aren't natural landscapes. We have to wipe out a lot of natural landscape and habitat to create those fields. And once we do that, we fill them full of cows, loads and loads and loads of cows. And then we've got to feed these cows. And I used to think that cows ate grass, and they do, but that's not what we feed them. We feed them grains and pulses, high protein foods that we ship in from all over the country. Bear in mind, those foods, plant-based foods, could have been used to feed the people in the country of origin far more efficiently, but we pump them into our cows. And because we're feeding them things they're not really supposed to eat, we pump them full of antibiotics. Then we slaughter them, process them, and package them. That whole process is totally dependent on fossil fuels, as is the airplane that travels, that sends our meat all over the world. And then it arrives on our supermarket shelves, and you might think, well, what's wrong with that? We get, in the UK, we get, 10 packets of meat for £10 in a local supermarket. And, I get that that's kind of tempting, but actually the true cost is just not reflected there. So I was listening recently that, the UK agriculture system is subsidised about £3 billion a year, and the environmental cleanup cost is similar, around 2.7 billion. So those costs just aren't reflected. And when you start to look at some of the impact and the numbers on that industry, so we're using about half the world's land to farm animals, about 30% of the world's water. And this one just blew my mind. So estimated 91% of every tree that's ever been cut down historically has been to make space for cheap meat for us. It's a leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions, ocean dead zones, and species extinction generally. So, it kind of dawned on me that the way we're producing animals to eat, dairy, is inefficient, unsustainable, and really, really wasteful. So then I thought, okay, what about fish? I'm a scientist. I know that fish are very efficient at converting their food into protein for us because they're cold-blooded and they float, so they don't waste energy the way a cow does. And I investigated this industry and discovered that Norway and Russia have invested heavily into these, the fishing industry, these huge factory ships that trawl the seas. We put out huge nets and catch about 90 million tons of fish a year. And And then once that's been caught into the net, it's taken out on board the ship. They have a process called H&Ging, which is where they take the heads off and cut the guts out. And then that fish, no matter where it's caught in the world, often will make its way to China, because in China they have huge, huge factories filled with people who are incredibly efficient at filleting fish. So the fish gets filleted, and then it often gets frozen into a 7.5 kilogram block. Then that frozen block of fish gets transported to Korea, because there they have these huge cold stores, the same size as Wembley Football Stadium, and it's racked floor to ceiling with frozen blocks of fish. So it's now become a commodity that people can buy and sell, and it can stay in storage for months. And this is where it enters supermarket supply chains. So if you think about that for a minute, a fish that was caught maybe 50 miles off the north coast of Scotland has been transported halfway around the world, frozen, transported to another country, stored there maybe for months, bought and sold a few times, and then it makes its way back towards the UK, possibly stopping off in another country to be processed, maybe turned into a fish finger or a fish cake. And then when you come to buy it on your supermarket shelf, it says North Atlantic cod. So, you know, they're not lying. It is, that's the origin, but you would just never know the journey that it's been on. And I think the food industry is filled with examples like this, which, you know, are pretty close to fraud, I would argue. But, you know, there's very clever lawyers behind that make sure that it's written in the right way. And, you know, I'm not advocating everyone needs to become a vegan, but what I am saying is that we need to understand the true cost of the way we're currently producing food, and we need to make informed decisions about the food we're buying, where it's coming from. And as consumers, I think we have the power to put the pressure on the producers and the supermarkets to be more transparent and purchase it in a more, you know, ethical way. So just two stats to kind of really summarize what I've just said. So for every 1 kilogram of fish that gets eaten, around 9 kilograms of fish is taken up out the sea and then discarded. We call it bycatch or bykill. So it's a hugely inefficient process. And this is reflected in the fact that since 1970, there's half the amount of fish left in the sea. So, you know, in a little over a generation, we've just reduced the ocean stocks by 50%. So fast forward another 50 years or less, and there will be no fish left for us to consume if we carry on as we are. So again, unsustainable, inefficient, and really, really wasteful process. So the final thing, you know, I thought, okay, well, what about veg production? You can't go wrong with that, can you? But it turns out we can. So because we've massively over-farmed the land, there's no natural fertility left in the soil. So we have to spray fertilizers on everything, and we grow largely in monoculture. So we have to spray pesticides on everything. They're not good for people or the planet. And it's all based on fossil fuels, as is the tractor that harvests them and the lorry that collects them. And a lot of the vegetables we buy get packaged, get put into plastic bags. And then that goes off to a depot, loaded on board an airplane, and then it makes its way to us. So I don't know how many of you have ever bought a packet of salad, and then you open it, you take the first few leaves out, you make a salad or a sandwich. And then when you go back a few days later, essentially there's just brown mush in the bottom of the bag. You know, about 60% of all packet salad gets put in the bin. It's hugely, hugely wasteful. So again, some numbers just to kind of reflect that. So unnecessary food packaging, insane food miles, loads of waste, and the whole thing is totally dependent on fossil fuels. So, you know, that's the situation as it is right now. But if you consider that by 2050, you know, there's an estimated 10 billion people on the planet, and based on current consumption habits, we're going to need about 70% more food. But I've just told you that we're using half the world's land to grow food, and there's only half the amount of fish left in the sea. So it kind of seemed to me that, you know, we either need a new planet, which is highly unlikely, or we need a new way to be producing and consuming food. So that's when I discovered this concept called aquaponics. So aquaponics is a system that allows you to grow fish, so a source of protein, And it allows you to farm vegetables, plants, without the need for any petrochemical fertilizers or pesticides. And the system is really scalable, so you can do it in your kitchen, on your worktop, or you could take over a huge warehouse and do it. So the way it works is fish give off this waste product called ammonia from their gills, and that gets released into the water. If you leave it in the water, it becomes toxic. So we pump it into a separate tank, which is filled with microorganisms, bacteria that break down that ammonia, and they release nitrate into the water, as well as lots of other mysterious things that we don't fully understand. But that nitrate and those mysterious things turn out to be an amazing fertilizer for plants, and the plants grow incredibly quickly. And in turn, the plants, by taking out those nutrients from the water, they're cleaning the water for the fish. So it's a really nice, efficient, closed loop system that is not depleting the ocean's stocks of fish, and it's not destroying the soils and degrading the soils and the surface of the planet by farming in a really unsustainable monoculture way. But aquaponics is just one small part of a fully integrated urban farm. And I think that the big thing for me is, the way we produce food at the moment feels really linear and very exploitative. We bring resources from outside the city into the city, and we decimate the areas around the city to feed ourselves. But actually, if we kind of reimagine how food's grown and start to embed that into the fabric of society, I think there's huge potential. I'm not saying there's a lot of challenges to overcome and learning to be done, but there's huge potential. So if we take a look at a fully integrated urban farm, as I said, it's not linear. It's much more integrated and connected. And in many ways, it's kind of mirrored on nature. There's very little waste in the system. So we take waste products like coffee or cardboard. So there's plenty of ground coffee and cardboard from all the Costas and Amazons around the world. And on that, you can grow mushrooms. So mushrooms are incredibly good for you. Like some of the studies coming out about the therapeutic benefits and the benefits of mushrooms for your brain are incredible. Then once you've cropped those and sold them, you feed what's left to worms along with food waste. So food waste is a big, expensive problem in cities. You give that to worms and have something called a vermiculture system. And they take that waste and give you 3 incredibly valuable outputs. They give you the best compost you will ever use, a natural pesticide, and a fish food, which you can feed to your fish in your aquaponic system. Remember, your fish are fertilizing your plants, and your plants are purifying the water for your fish. You can even do clever things like take the excess oxygen from your plants and give that to your mushrooms, and take the excess CO2 produced by your mushrooms and give that to your plants. And once your worms can't eat anymore and you filleted your fish, that organic material you put into something called an anaerobic digester, and that will power and heat your whole farm. So you see there, there's no waste in this system. It's much more integrated. And as I said, I think there's huge potential to start integrating this into cities now and into the future. Yeah, it was at that point really that, Jens and I kind of been on this journey of discovering all these different systems and concepts. And I was coming into the final year of my PhD, and Jens was partway through his, and we thought, we need to take a step outside of academia, and we need to just have a go at this. We need to see if we can, stop just talking about it, thinking about it, reading about it, like actually do it. So we set up Farm Urban in early 2014, really with the mission of wanting to grow food that's good for people in ways that are good for the planet. And then we drew up plans to convert abandoned spaces in Liverpool city centre into these integrated urban farms. So on this one there, you can see huge fish tanks and racks of salads being grown. And this is in an old abandoned, kind of like a cave structure actually, down by the docks in Liverpool. And then we managed to persuade someone to actually give us some money to do it. So this is the first system we ever built up on the roof of the University of Liverpool. So we begged, borrowed, and stole almost every component you can see there. And it was really interesting. We learned an awful lot, but we proved that actually on a disused, abandoned space, we were growing hundreds of koi carp that were fertilized in our salad and herb beds that were served in the cafe directly below. So zero plastic, zero waste, zero food miles, really, really efficient way to be growing salad and herb crops. But then we kind of stopped and thought, well, okay, maybe this gets around the production issue and the distribution issue, but what about consumption? You know, is putting farms on rooftops really gonna change people's relationship to food, change their behavior, and encourage them to eat better, healthier food? And, you know, that was kind of my main reason for coming at this. And I wasn't sure that it was going to, but it was actually my daughter, Bella, who kind of gave me the insight that it had the potential to do so. So she was 2.5 at the time. And I was trying to get her to eat salads and drink kale smoothies, which is a really hard sell to a 2.5-year-old kid. Even though I'm like mad on all this stuff, she'd push it away and say, no way, Daddy, I'm not eating or drinking that. But then I took one of the small aquaponic systems that we were developing at the time, and I put it into our kitchen, much to my wife's dismay. And I didn't say anything to Bella, but, you know, there's fish living in the bottom of that system and plants growing in the top. And Bella took an interest in the fish, and she named them Fish and Fishy, and they're still alive today. But then she took an interest in the plants that were growing in the top, and she wants to smell them and taste them. And now every morning when she comes down, the first thing she does still is feed those fish. We harvest the salads and herb crops off the top, put them in the NutriBullet blender with an apple, some honey, some water, and we blitz it up. And it's basically a kale smoothie, but we call them super juices, and she loves it. And she's in school telling all her friends about it, asking me to come in and make super juices for her and all her friends. And that was kind of a really, really powerful moment for me, because everyone says behavioral change is really hard, and I think it is. But I'd observed it with my own daughter over the space of about 2 or 3 months. And I thought, you know, what is it that sparked this kind of quite drastic change in behavior? And I think it's because of the relationship she formed to her food. She was connected to it. So the TED hero man, Ron Finley, says, you know, if kids grow it, then they eat it. But I would add to that, you know, if they know it, they eat it. So, you know, kids have, I suppose, more historically, have really bad relationships with food because there's, you know, Coca-Cola and Cadbury's and Nestle. They're really, really good at making these things that are bad for us look good and taste good. And they have very, you know, good marketing machines behind that. And I used to say that, you know, no one got rich from telling you to take 8 hours sleep and eat salad when I first put this talk together, which was a few years ago. But I think over the last few years, we've really seen a change in that. I think kind of lifestyle and healthier choices, and people wrote books and probably made a lot of money telling you to take 8 hours sleep. So I'm really encouraged by that. And I think that people are moving towards healthier choices. And I'm really hopeful for where this goes. But that made us change direction in the company slightly. And instead of trying to do these large scale farms, we thought, you know, we want to build farms and systems that engage people and start that conversation. So we added to our mission, we want to grow food that's good for people in ways that are good for the planet. And we want to share the importance of what we do and why we do it with as many people as possible. And so the first system of that nature was this. So this is the world's first DNA double helix inspired aquaponic system. So this was a system designed and built by a load of sixth form students in an inner city school in Liverpool. We built it out of all upcycled materials, and that sits in the reception of their school building now. And it kind of gets people thinking and asking questions, and you know, thousands of students have probably walked past that and talked about it over the years. The next system we installed was in an abandoned conservatory attached to botanical gardens on the Wirral. So we cleared it out and installed a range of different hydroponic and aquaponic systems in there, and a worm farm, and put a lot of infographics up. So there's about 200,000 visitors each year to Nest Gardens, and people can go in there and learn about aquaponics, urban farming, and what's so important about it. Then we got asked by Alder Hey Children's Hospital to install a system or 3 systems on the wards there. So that was just being built in 2015. And the development team were really keen that the patients had this kind of relationship to food to encourage them to make healthier choices. And that's what we saw. So by the systems being installed there, the kids kind of climb all over that system. They watch the fish being fed and they want to know, what is that growing in there? You know, how does this work? So when they get served greens or healthy food, they're more inclined to want to taste that and try it because they've got a relationship to it. And then we developed this system. So this is a system called the V-Farm, a mini V-Farm. We put housing around it and wanted to make it look like a vending machine. And the idea was that we'd take the idea of, you know, convenient crisps and chocolate and sugar water and replace it with living plants and put that in really public places to just get people thinking about, you know, why couldn't I have a salad or a smoothie instead of a chocolate bar or a can of sugar water? So that was quite fun. And then this is the little system that got Bella inspired. So that's an open source system that we've developed out of, you know, essentially 2 IKEA storage bins and some everyday plumbing components. And we open source the design so that, you know, wherever you are in the world, if you can get those components, you can assemble an aquaponic system and start growing your own and learning about this stuff. And then we developed a whole workshop around that, where instead of me standing up and talking to people, actually we get them to build the system themselves, and they get a really kind of deeper understanding of what it is and how it works by doing it. And then that kind of led us, you know, deeper into education, and we developed the Future Food Challenge. So we've got a primary school program and a secondary school program, where essentially we challenge students to become the leaders, scientists, entrepreneurs of the future, and say, well, it's your future. You guys are going to need to help us solve this problem. And we developed an online platform so that we can kind of scale this. And essentially the students have to design and build their own small scale aquaponic systems or hydroponic systems and build a whole brand and a business around that, which takes place both in person and online. So I just got some highlights from that there. So top left is kind of one of the small scale systems that students will have built. Top right is students talking through the market research, the brand development, the business model canvas we have them do. And we have a final event in our space where we get 10 schools from around the city to come and kind of compete in a bit of a Dragon's Den style competition. Bottom left is the guys pitching in the boardroom. So we have a panel of judges, which is made up of academics, industry leaders, and they vote on the best pitch. So it's good fun. And every year we're just completely blown away by the quality that the kids come up with. So this is one of the winning designs from a couple of years ago. So you can see there, they've got the fish living in the bottom, tanks on the top, and some lights. So I have to give a shout out to Merseyside Police for this one. So we've got a really nice relationship with them, whereby the cannabis dismantling unit take all the seized cannabis growing equipment and they donate it to us. So that light on the top there was probably used in a cannabis farm somewhere, and we've repurposed it, and we're letting kids from around the city use it to really learn some interesting skills and apply those skills. So that's quite fun. So then, you know, back to the growing. So we probably spent a couple of years really developing the online programs, the education programs and the outreach. And in the background, we had our researchers. So we've got some PhD researchers and Jens and myself. We're really trying to understand, is aquaponics viable at scale? And if we're going to raise some investment to do this, we need to know that it works, because we've seen a lot of examples of farms that have come and gone quite quickly. So one of our PhD students, Francis, his whole PhD is around the risk associated with this industry, why farms have failed, why farms have succeeded. And Lawrence Sanderson, so he looks primarily at what's the optimum hydroponic and aquaponic system. So he's modeling the nutrients that flow around those systems. And both those guys' research really informed our decision as to which system to buy. And both of them told us aquaponics doesn't work at scale at the moment. As I mentioned before, the magic stuff that's in the fish waste, no, it's a living system and there's amazing stuff happens there, but it's quite variable and there's a lot unknown. Whereas hydroponics, if I put nutrients A and B into my system and the light and the temperature and the humidity is right, I know I'm going to get X kilos of herbs and leafy greens. So we made the decision to go with hydroponics for the larger scale farm, and then continue researching the aquaponics with the view to transition into that in the future. So this is our space in the Baltic Triangle in Liverpool. So we've got about 500 square meters in the most fantastic Victorian warehouse. So above us is a school. So they've been instrumental really in helping us in so many ways, develop all our education programs, test them on the students there. So it's a really nice kind of reciprocal relationship. So they get some pretty cool innovative stuff going on in the building, and we get to work with the students to figure out like what actually works in a classroom setting. But the other thing is they have this basement that there wasn't much being done with it. So we said, oh, we could think of a use for that. And then we decided on the Zip farm. So this is a vertical hydroponic system. So you can see the hundreds of vertical towers growing basil. So the way it works is we have a large tank with nutrients in, and they pump the nutrients that trickle down those towers. And then there's lights hanging in front of those towers, which allow us to produce herbs, leafy greens, 365 days of the year. So at the time, this technology just had significant investments. So SoftBank and Bezos Ventures had put about $200 million into the technology behind this. And then we've been doing some preliminary research ourselves with some smaller scale zip towers, and we were really pleased with the way it performed. So we decided that that was going to be the system that we would purchase. So we installed our first 240 tower zip farm into our basement space in Liverpool. So you can see there are our towers. So they're about 8 feet tall, and they just about fit into the archways. And then you can see at the bottom, they're on wheels. So essentially you unclip those frames and you can wheel them out and take them down to the harvest table and harvest the produce. And then just some images of the edible wall or the green walls kind of in full production, and then our boxes, our salad boxes. So, we didn't just want to be growing food and harvesting it and cutting it up and putting it into plastic bags for it to rot. We needed to think of something a bit more innovative. So we actually harvest the produce whole from the tower with the roots still on, and the roots go into the boxes. So people are getting living salad boxes delivered to them on a weekly basis. So I've just got a short 2-minute video actually, which is for our Kickstarter campaign, which kind of brings the farm to life a little bit. So I'll just play that now.
We've been growing greens in the heart of Liverpool since 2014 and have now created the city's first vertical farm.
With its roots firmly anchored in Farm Urban's Baltic basement, Greens for Good, our leafy offshoot, is a fresh campaign, bringing healthy, locally grown greens to the people of Liverpool and beyond.
Over the past 4 years, we've been educating schools, businesses and communities on the benefits of growing food in cities and how we can create a sustainable future for food.
Greens for Good is the next step in our mission to get fresh, healthy greens into every classroom in Liverpool.
By delivering boxes of mighty greens and education programmes to schools across the city, the Greens for Good campaign is creating a positive change in our relationship with sustainable, healthy food.
We have 3 ways you can get your greens and ensure that local children get theirs too. Buy a box of greens, a weekly delivery of living leaves, edible flowers and mighty greens in a compostable box.
Purchase a produce pod, an aquaponics system to grow your own sustainable greens all year round. Erect an edible wall. Our 8-tower edible walls are an eye-catching way to grow your greens and are the perfect addition to any office, apartment or public space.
When you buy a box of greens, you'll support a box of mighty greens going into a local school. You can also go like for like on a produce pod or edible wall, which means the local school gets the same, supported by one of our education programs.
Using the soilless growing system of hydroponics, we grow food in space-saving vertical towers. Our produce is 100% pesticide-free, grown using 90% less water than if it were grown in a field. It's zero waste and it's hyper-local.
For us, it's all about growing food that's good for people in ways that are good for the planet. However you choose to get behind greens for good, you're helping us on our campaign to get fresh, nutritious, local greens to every child, every classroom.
Cool. So hopefully that's kind of giving you just some insight into the farm, see it in action there, and then some of the other elements that we're talking about. Okay, sorry.
Bloody good.
Okay, so yeah, so the good, as the video highlighted, so Jens hates it when I say this because he says I'll piss off the organic crowd, and I really don't want to do that, but I call it the beyond organic. So we can't be certified organic because we don't grow in soil. You know, we're 100% pesticide free because we don't allow any pests into the farm. So there's definitely a place for both, but just to make the distinction there. So we're hyper local. So we've got a 4-mile radius capped on all our products. We try to do as much as possible by bicycle. So we've got a logistics partner called Agile. So they have e-cargo bikes, which fit about 20 of our boxes on a bike, and they zoom around the city delivering them. Or the larger orders further afield, we have electric vans doing those. So estimated saving around 90% less, saving about 90% water. So the water circulates around the system, so we don't get evaporation, we don't get runoff. So it's really efficient when it comes to water. And we tried really hard to think of a way to be as zero waste with our packaging. So it's all cardboard boxes, which are reused. And then the little cups that the plants come in, they're fully compostable. And we found that people really love that. So they're not so good, the stuff we haven't solved yet. So energy, you know, that farm is running with LED lights on for 16 hours a day, which allows us to create the perfect conditions to grow basil 365 days a year. The pumps and the HVAC systems are quite energy intensive. But I think there's an opportunity there to make it really clean and green and use renewables to power all of those systems. There's no reason why we couldn't have that all powered by renewables. The other one that we're working on is nutrients. So conventional hydroponic nutrients, you know, there's some question around how they're produced and the carbon associated with that. But as I said, I think there's future for aquaponics. I think there's future for nutrients from aquaculture. So that's kind of a decoupled aquaponic system and maybe even potentially human waste in the future. So as I said at the start, kind of research is really key to what we do. So just kind of really briefly, so I mentioned Lawrence's work before. So he's kind of characterizing nutrient flows in hydroponics and aquaponics systems and developing models to really test that. Francis is really looking at the risk associated with vertical farming and trying to understand what some of the barriers are. And he's actually developing a decision support system. So that is a system. So if you want to set up a farm, I'll actually ask you a series of questions so you can get a decent measure on your risk and help you mitigate that. So Sam is one of our most recent PhD students. So he's looking at really trying to optimize growth of our plants in the towers. And he's doing that through root inoculants, a mix of fungi and bacteria inoculum, and also the interaction of the LED lights with those. And then Abigail's focusing more on the social side. So how do we take our education programs and broaden the scope of those to start to work with different groups of individuals. So we're starting to work in prisons and with some other vulnerable kind of at-risk members of our community, because I think there's so much amazing content and skills to be learned through this stuff. So then just touching a little bit on COVID-19 and kind of how that's affected our business. So threats, so we were supplying businesses, schools and restaurants with produce. So overnight, all 3 of those got turned off, which was really, really scary, because we just had no one to sell our produce to. So we just decided, okay, let's, we're in a production cycle. We'll just donate all the produce we're growing to people who are struggling to get food. So that was really good. And then we also just kind of did a quick pivot and said, right, let's just start supplying to local individuals who are at home. Just did a bit of a social media push, and took our boxes and said, these are for home delivery. It's something we'd always wanted to do, but we're concerned around logistics, what the price point, how viable is it to get things outside the city centre. And we were just blown away by the response. So we went from being about 50% capacity in the farm to 100% capacity in 4.5 weeks. So that was a mix of just individuals taking the weekly salad boxes, and also kind of funded projects to get our greens to vulnerable people, whether it's housing associations, asylum networks, homeless shelters. So we've got a really nice mix of produce going to people across the city. It also forced us to really push the online offering, so adapt our materials so they're kind of 100% online, which again, we've kind of given free access to all the students in the schools so that they can access those programs. And it's kind of, allowed us to tap into new markets in many ways. So those housing associations and some of those grant funders to allow us to produce and supply food to really vulnerable people has been a really good outcome from the current situation. So just some highlights of that. So we kind of upped our biosecurity protocols on the farm, split the team into 2 shifts, and you can top left, you can see our delivery partners, Danny, on the freight bikes, and just some of the local people we've been supplying weekly boxes of greens to, which has been really fun, getting out to meet lots of different people, and see and hear the response from people. We started growing some edible flowers, which has been quite fun too, and then doing some of our own products, so some pesto, and that's really nice actually. It tastes amazing, but it means that the farm becomes zero waste. So when we're harvesting the greens and the herbs to go into the boxes, inevitably there's some leaves that fall, but we collect all those leaves at the end of every shift and we blitz them up, give them to a local chef, and he's making these amazing pestos and salsa verdes and preserved products. So we really are zero waste. Any root matter or anything that can't go in the pesto goes in the compost. So that's quite fun. And then we've just developed some different products. So we've got a local social enterprise who's made this flat pack holder, so the plants can come out of the box and sit on the windowsill in that holder, which has been quite fun too. So that's kind of farm urban, our journey over the last 5 years. Hopefully giving you some insight into what urban farming is, what vertical farming is, some of the challenges we've faced, some of the obstacles we've overcome, and really just trying to stay true to this mission of trying to find ways to grow food for people that are good for people and the planet. I think there's a lot more barriers and obstacles to overcome, but we're just getting started really. The team's growing and we're keen to replicate this model many times over. So there's kind of our social feeds if anyone wants to follow us, and if there is time, and I'd really welcome any questions actually, and hear some of your thoughts.
That was fantastic, Paul.
Mind-blowing. Wow. That was a lot to take. I mean, that was a journey, and you really illustrated the crisis we're in terms of food, how we produce food, and how our consumption is consuming the planet, and that was terrifying. So thank you for that. And then what a marvelous solution, and what a transparent solution. You're not pulling any punches. You've done something amazing, but it needs to go much further if people are going to be able to use it at the scale that we need it. But just ultimately, thank you for doing what you do, because it's necessary. and super inspiring. And I will actually be in Liverpool this fall, working with Gone West. So I would love to see it and taste it. Actually, more
Yeah, you're
importantly.
very, very welcome. Definitely.
Man, yeah, Namisha, do you have any questions? I'm gobsmacked.
I did have one question. I know we're conscious we only have a few minutes left, but Paul, this is I think this is one that a lot of people will probably be thinking. How easy is this to do it at home for yourself?
Yeah, no, really good question. And like I said, it's totally scalable. So that little system that I showed you that my daughter engaged with, you know, we have a few of those in the house. I've got, you know, lots of people who are running those. You know, they're going to supplement your herbs and your leafy greens. They're not going to feed you. But some of those, the edible walls that you saw on the Kickstarter video, you know, I think, you know, kitchen showrooms will have those integrated into them in the future. I think there's some products coming online that, you know, you can start to do that. Sure, there's still some barriers to it, but I think it's doable now at a small scale, you know, which will supplement food. But I think, you know, we're not far off being able to do this and have a vertical farm integrated into your kitchen or into your living room. So we're starting to install these farms, the edible walls into businesses and shared office spaces. And we're seeing people really kind of, yeah, inspired by it and kind of loving having that edible greenery around the space.
And what do you guys have your eyes on in the future in terms of different kind of plants that you can grow? I know you moved on to flowers. Is there any way of getting, I don't know, fruit or nuts in the picture?
Yeah, so theoretically, you know, you can grow anything in these systems, and that's a question we got asked a lot. You know, especially the kids when we give the talks in schools. Yeah, but you're not going to feed the world with lettuce and herbs, which is a fair point. But you know, the leafy greens and the herbs make most sense because that's what a lot of the lighting technology is optimized for. It's very doable, but really for us, those products are the most perishable and highly wasted. So, you know, potato grows really well in soil and it stores and transports well, whereas, you know, salad and herbs don't. So it makes sense to grow them as close to where they're being consumed as possible. And then I think it's a staged process. You take the pressure off the agricultural system, and then that means the soil-based growing can slow down a bit, become more sustainable. But I think, you know, there's no reason why you couldn't grow everything hydroponically. Just the lighting and the nutrients solutions and the environmental control just needs to be further optimized.
Yeah, I hope you guys find or not you guys, but we as a people need to find the investment to put into this, because it just starts the conversation, you know. And I mean, you're two friends who managed to change a lot of lives and change the way people look at their food. So I mean, if this was, it is scalable, and I'm just super grateful again for you doing what you've done, and for sharing it with us sincerely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We'll definitely
cool to keep the conversation going somehow, but we'll follow you. Greens for good. There it is.
Yeah, so we'll definitely share all these details, Paul, with the audience in our hub, and let them obviously reach out to you. But before you go, I think one personal challenge that I would personally be interested in helping you solve is how do you power all of this with clean energy? So I hope to get in touch with you afterwards to see how we can make that happen.
Yeah, do. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for giving your time. I'm sure everyone really appreciates it, and they're definitely all inspired. So yeah, we just really appreciate you giving your time to such a worthy cause.
Well, thank you for having me, guys. Thanks, you've been amazing.
Thank you.
All right, take care. See you now.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.